Hey campers, welcome to day 2 of Fashion and Fiber Camp. We're just going to pick up right where we left off yesterday with our batiks. If you remember what we learned about yesterday, a batik is a way that you dye fabric by using, traditionally they use melted wax, but we used glue to draw an image on a piece of fabric so that everything that you paint or dye gets a color, but anything that had the resist, whether it was glue or wax, stays white. So this was my final product that I used as an example. And if you remember yesterday, we added glue to our white fabric and drew a nice image. So mine is all dry. It's a little bit hard to see, but it did dry up really nicely overnight. And it was on newspaper, so when I peeled it off of the newspaper, you can see all of these little bits got stuck onto it. Not a big deal. That'll come right off when we wash it. So we're just gonna start by setting up our workstation. The first thing you should do is peel your batik, your glued fabric off of your newspaper. And like I said, don't worry too much about the little pieces of paper that will stick to it. Just try and get them as small as possible. So when I originally ripped this off, there were long strips of fabric or of paper, and I just tore them down to these little pieces. So we're gonna set up our fabric. I have a cup of water here. It looks blue, but there's just water inside. I have my foam brush, and I have my 4 paint colors. So in your camp kits, we actually gave you 5 colors of paint. I'm not gonna use black. I think black is something we're going to use for one of our other projects. So we're using black for one of our other projects. So we have these 4 colors here. So I have, in my camp kit, I had an orange, a dark blue, kind of like a teal or a turquoise color, and a red. And I know that this really isn't that much paint, but we really don't need that much. Okay, so I'm gonna tilt the screen down so that you can see less of my face and more of what I'm actually doing. Okay, so you can see my paint is here. I take my brush, my water, and the important thing to do here is we're gonna keep our sponge brush pretty wet the whole time because we want to water down our paint. So there are a few ways you can do this. You can fill your brush with water and then squeeze some water into each of your paint cups. That'll make it thinner, right? I like to do this because it helps our paint go a little bit longer, and it works really well for the batik because it makes it easier to paint on the fabric if your paint is not quite as thick. All right, so I'm going to start with these 2 colors, the blue and the turquoise. I'm going to take my brush. I'm just going to kind of bring it up and down just to mix my paint together, and can you see how it's a lot thinner in there? And once I have some paint, I'm actually just going to quickly dip in my water just to thin it out even a little bit more. And I'm just going to start painting the water part of my batik. So if you remember, my batik had like fish on it. So you're gonna wanna kind of like treat this like a coloring sheet. Everywhere where your glue is kind of like the picture in a coloring book, and we're gonna treat those like lines. If you paint or color over the lines, it's super not a big deal. It'll still look really cool. All right. So I'm just gonna do this. I'm gonna kind of mix the colors together, the blues. But I have some polka dots that I made with glue, and I have some bubbles. I'm gonna paint the bubbles a different color, so I'm gonna leave those unpainted on the inside for now. But my little polka dots, I can kind of paint right over the glue, and nothing really happens. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of start mixing some of these colors together. And I think it'll look pretty cool. So if you see how I'm painting, the reason I gave you a sponge brush instead of a paintbrush is because with a paintbrush, you kind of want to be going like this, but with a sponge brush, you can actually paint by bouncing your sponge brush up and down on the fabric. And I think that that works best with fabric paint to help really get it absorbed into the fabric, and it gives you a little bit more control over where you're putting the paint. And make sure that you keep your sponge nice and wet the whole time. So I'm dipping it before I dip it in the paint pretty much every time. And you know, it starts to look pretty messy pretty quick, but that's okay. We're just painting away. So I'm just gonna keep doing this. You can see my paper underneath is pretty messy. So what I might do actually, well, that's okay. I'm just not gonna move it really. Eventually I'll just double up my newspaper to make sure that I'm not staining the table or anything, but for right now. So you can see this paint was a little bit too thick, so I just wet my brush and I'm just going over it with a more wet brush, and that lets me spread that glob of paint way further. So I can actually cover so much more of the fabric that way. And my design was gonna be from yesterday's video, I don't know if you remember, but it was gonna be a paisley pattern, which is like a traditional pattern that you can see in batiks pretty frequently. But as soon as I started working on it, I was like, this actually doesn't even look like anything, so I turned them into fish. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. So that's just pretty cool that you can, you know, change your mind and change your design to be whatever you want it to be. So I'll stop painting this because you don't need to watch me do the whole thing. But that's basically how we're painting. If I wanted to change the color, you know, like these are all kind of blues, so I was just not really washing my brush out and switching between these two colors. But I don't want to take my brush like this and then dip it into orange because it'll turn a color that I don't want. So I'm gonna really clean my brush out, and the sponge brush is very easy to clean out if you don't mind some wet fingers. If you don't want your fingers wet, you can just get a paper towel and do this squeezy part. So you just dip it a bunch of times and then squeeze the water out. And then I'm gonna go into my orange and mix it all around, get some of that extra paint off, dip my brush again, and I'm gonna make this fish orange. And I'm doing that the same way. I'm just stamping my paint. I might make all of the fish orange and then make their like fins red, but maybe I'll make this one kind of orangish red. So I'm gonna dip just the edge of my brush into the red so that it kind of looks reddish and orange. I'll dip it back into the orange again so you can see that the bottom is red and the top is orange. And then I'm gonna use that to basically make just one part of my fish red. So can you see that? This little fish has like a little red tail, and then I can use the red side to make the actual tail red. I find this super, super fun. I hope that you guys enjoy doing it as much as I have been enjoying it. It's just pretty relaxing to do, honestly. And I just think it's like a fun project, and it turns out really, really cool. So I'm gonna do it this way as well. I'll make it kind of multicolor there. Don't be afraid to mix your paint colors together. Don't be afraid to try something like what I just did, where you have two colors on one brush to get some cool painting. You can see that I actually did that. I'll bring you back up here. Hey, you can see that I actually mixed some colors together when I was painting my flowers. I think this side might be easier to see. So like this one has some reds and oranges. This one is like orange and yellow. This one is pink and yellow. So I did mix some colors together there. But happy painting. Make sure that after you finish painting your batik, you're going to put it outside if it's not raining. If it's not raining, put it outside and it'll dry in the sun in like 5 minutes. If it is raining, just put it in a sunny window, like a window that gets a lot of light, or put a fan on it. It'll dry really, really quick, and you'll actually be able to start the next step, which is in Batik Part 3. So get excited. We're really excited for you to do this project. It's going to be really fun. Okay, see you soon.